Hi there, this is my video journal number 2. I will discuss the social characteristics of autism spectrum disorder that I have observed so far, and also the characteristics that I have not observed and maybe where I would be able to observe them. For my observations, I've continued observing 2 students, student A in our mild moderate program. He is fully included in his general education classroom and receives specialized academic services in the form of push-in and pull-out during his elective block. And also student B is in our specialized teaching program, which we call STP. It is a smaller group of kids that receives most of their support in a small group. They have moderate to severe needs, and he pushes into his electives but spends the majority of his time in the separate classroom. One social characteristic that I observed was the preference to be alone and avoiding big social situations. I observed this in 2 different settings for student A. In all his gen ed classes, he's asked teachers to sit in the back or separate from everyone else. In science class, I observed when they were doing group work that he moved himself to a back table and the teacher allowed him to finish the project independently. I also observed this preference to be alone during recess time. We have a big blacktop and there's a corner area that's really close to my classroom, that's a set of stairs where the student likes to hang out. He kind of avoids all the rest of his peers and he sits back in by himself, not really interacting with other students during this time. I also observed this same characteristics, this social characteristic of being alone and not necessarily engaging in big social situations with student B as well. At lunch, he sits at a table in the cafeteria with 3 other students in the same STP class, along with a paraeducator. During my observation, there were no conversations that were initiated between those 3 students, nor really any interaction. The students were then released to recess, and at recess I noticed student B getting closer to other students but never fully engaging in any of the activities that the rest of the kids were doing. He seemed to just circle around different groups, but never started playing any games or initiating any conversations, and then kind of was by himself. Another characteristic that I observed was social communication within peers and teachers with both of these students. The first observation that I did with student B was in his classroom. At first he was taking a sensory break. He had his objects, a whole box of objects with him, and he was by himself looking through and doing some of that. After the sensory break, he started working one-on-one with a paraeducator on spelling words and sounds. Even with general questions as the paraeducator was trying to engage with him, he never initiated anything. When the paraeducator asked a question, he often repeated the words back to the question without answering. He would make eye contact with her, but his tone wouldn't change with the different types of questions that he was answering. It was pretty flat tone and sometimes high-pitched. And I also noticed within the conversation, he also made a lot of extra sounds between questions. For student A, I also observed him trying to communicate socially with a peer. I have observed his difficulties talking and relating to peers when he's not by himself. Outside at recess, when he's not sitting outside the stairs, he has started to come into my classroom, which I think he feels is a safe place where there's one other student who also likes to hang out. This other student also has an IEP and has worked with student A in small groups, so I think there is some comfort between the 2. I have seen him try to interact with her, and sometimes he struggles with personal space, so he gets really close. And I've seen difficulties with him knowing the boundaries and reading cues from her. I observed the student, they were getting into some sort of disagreement about an anime character, and I observed the girl asking him to stop, and he was not really picking up on the cues of trying to change the conversation or move on. So that's just some of the social difficulties that I observed when relating to peers. Two characteristics that I did not necessarily observe was the narrow view of interest and also the difficulty in expressing emotions and reading emotions of others. When observing in a school, a lot of the interactions are structured. Even at recess, who they interact with and the timing that they are there is only a certain set of kids. And so I don't think it gives the students the freedom to necessarily talk about what they want to or to interact with peers of their choice, because they're still in their pods, oftentimes due to COVID. And there could be other classes with other students that they might not be friends with or feel comfortable with, so I just didn't see a lot of social interactions that was more open and where they could free to talk about what they want. I think if I were to observe some of those characteristics in a more relaxed and comfortable setting, I might see them talk more and maybe be able to see if they do have that narrow view of interest. Also be able to see if they could read the emotions of others or express their emotions. This could happen maybe at home with parents or other family members, or maybe in a play date with friends that they're familiar with. I think in these types of situations, I would observe more comfortable communication or conversation that goes on, and not such structured either academic talk that they have to do when they're working in small groups, or even at recess when it's really overwhelming with a lot of peers and not necessarily peers that they are friends with, but peers that they have been forced to talk to. So those are just some of the observations that I've made that exhibit some of the social characteristics of autism spectrum disorder. As we know, it's different for every student, and so each student showed these characteristics in different ways. Thanks.